Hello and welcome to this video on Passover, or Pesach in Hebrew. This is a part of our Jewish festivals learning videos. In this video we'll be investigating the questions: what does the festival celebrate? How is the festival celebrated? And why is the festival of Passover important? So let's take a look at what the festival of Passover celebrates. In short, it remembers the time when the Hebrew slaves, who were led by Moses, were able to escape slavery in Egypt and begin the journey back to the Promised Land. This is because God gave a message to Moses for the Hebrews to sacrifice a lamb for God and to put its blood on the top and sides of the door. Then, when God sent the final plague, which was the angel of death, it was able to pass over the Hebrews' doors. In Exodus it says, "The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you." This is what gave Passover festival its name. This meant that in the middle of the night, once the angel of death passed, Moses again went to Pharaoh, and he allowed the Hebrews to go. The Hebrews baked bread quickly without yeast, as it did not have time to rise. They also asked the Egyptians for gold and cattle, which they could take with them on their journey to the Promised Land. So now we know what Pesach celebrates, we are now going to look at how they celebrate it. Well, the festival of Passover is over 8 days and is a festival so important that they have to prepare for it and commemorate it with a special meal called the Seder. So how do they prepare for Passover? Before the festival begins, Jewish people spend time cleaning hametz out of their house. Hametz means leaven and is any product which rises, such as wheat, oats or barley, which makes up foods such as bread, pasta and cake. These foods are strictly banned at Passover, as in the Torah it says, "For 7 days you are to eat bread made without yeast, and to remove yeast from your house." Therefore, any surface that could have touched leavened foods or has any crumbs has to be cleaned. Next is the Seder Meal, where they also read the Haggadah as a family. However, we'll go on to these two parts later. Jewish people recline at this meal to represent that they are now free and no longer slaves. This is because at the time of the first Passover, over 2,000 years ago, the rich reclined when eating and therefore was a symbol of wealth. This means that Jewish people at Passover do this to symbolise they are no longer slaves but free. Hymns and songs are sung, and this symbolises the joy of freedom that the festival of Passover gave them. Now to look at the meal in more detail. The Seder Plate consists of different symbolic foods, some to be eaten and some just to be symbolic. Firstly, a green leafy vegetable, such as parsley, is had with salt water. The vegetable is dipped into the water so it looks like tears. This is to symbolise the tears of the slaves. Bitter herbs, such as horseradish, is symbolic of the bitterness of slavery. A lamb shank bone symbolises the sacrificial lamb used by the Hebrew slaves to put on top of the sides of their door as a sign for the angel of death to pass over. Unleavened bread, called matzah, is had to remember that when the Jewish people escaped Egypt, they had no time for the bread to rise. A paste called haraset is had, which is a mixture of apples, nuts and red wine. This is symbolic of the mortar used when the slaves were making the buildings in Egypt. A roasted egg is had to symbolise new life and the new life that the Jewish people now will have in the Promised Land. Finally, 4 cups of wine are had to symbolise freedom, with each cup symbolising the 4 expressions of the Israelite freedom. First, I will take you out. Next, I will save you. I will redeem you. And finally, I will take you as a nation. A 5th cup is then reserved for Elijah. Elijah is a prophet who was meant to signal the arrival of the Messiah. So Elijah is welcomed by Jewish families, leaving the door open for him and even leaving him a seat. This celebration is in the hope that the arrival of the Messiah will be soon. Another ritual that takes place at the meal is with the matzah bread. Part of this bread is kept aside during the Seder until after the meal is over. The parents will hide this bread in the house and the children will look for it, and if they find it, they will win a prize. The idea of this is to keep the children excited and awake during the meal. Finally, reading the Haggadah allows Jews to remember their ancestors and their exodus from Egypt to the Promised Land. 4 questions are also asked by the youngest child. These questions are to cover any child's curiosity on why the night of Passover is so special. So now we are going to look at why the festival of Passover is so important. Firstly, celebrating Passover is a mitzvot. This means that God has commanded the Jewish people to celebrate this festival. Secondly, the festival is important as it allows the children to be educated about their ancestors. This is done with the 4 questions and with the afikomen. Thirdly, it's important as it allows Jewish people to remember that they are now free and no longer slaves. This is shown through the joyful singing, the glasses of wine, and also how they recline through the meal. Finally, it is important as it symbolizes that God has kept his covenant with the Jewish people. This is because God has saved them and protected them by sending the plague so they could escape slavery. So, there we are. We have now come to the end of this video, so time for a quick recap of the questions that we were investigating. We have looked at what the festival celebrates, which is the passing over of the angel of death, which allowed the Hebrew slaves to be free. We have looked at how it is celebrated with the cleaning of the hametz, the Seder Meal, and the reading of the Haggadah. And finally, we have looked at the importance as we now know that it is a mitzvot. It educates children, it remembers their freedom, and also it remembers that God kept his covenant with the Jewish people.